June 23rd, 1943. 0700 hours. Russell Islands, Solomon Chain. Lieutenant Commander John Blackburn watched the ungainly aircraft bounce down the coral runway, its massive nose blocking any forward view until the tailwheel finally lifted. The F4U Corsair looked like someone had attached wings to a flying oil drum. Japanese pilots who had seen them called them whistling death, but not out of fear. They were laughing. 3,000 miles away in Tokyo, Commander Minoru Genda reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the Pacific. American pilots were dying in their new fighter at an alarming rate. The Corsair killed more Marines in training than the Zero did in combat. Its stall characteristics were so vicious that the U.S. Navy had rejected it for carrier operations entirely. The Imperial Japanese Navy's premier fighter pilot couldn't suppress a smile. The Americans had built a fighter so dangerous that they were afraid to fly it themselves. The mathematics of aerial combat in 1943 seemed to favor Japan. The Mitsubishi Zero could turn inside any American fighter, could climb faster than most, and in the hands of veteran pilots who had been flying since the China campaign, it was virtually unbeatable in a dogfight. Japanese pilots averaged over 800 hours of flight time. They had been trained in the samurai tradition: one plane, one pilot, one kill. The Zero was an extension of the warrior himself, a flying sword. Lieutenant Junior Grade Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading ace with 64 victories, had test-flown a captured F-4F Wildcat. It was like flying a truck, he wrote in his diary. Heavy, slow to respond, impossible to see from. The Americans built their planes like they built their cars, all metal and muscle, no finesse. When intelligence reports arrived about an even larger, heavier American fighter entering service, veteran Zero pilots at Rabaul actually celebrated. The Americans were making their planes even bigger and clumsier. The first Corsair squadrons arrived in the Pacific in February 1943. Marine Fighting Squadron 124, the first unit equipped with the new fighter, lost more planes to accidents than to enemy action in their first month. The aircraft's massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney engine created so much torque that takeoffs became wrestling matches. The long nose meant pilots couldn't see the runway until they were airborne. The landing gear was so stiff that bounced landings often became catastrophes. Major Gregory Boyington, who would later command the famous Black Sheep Squadron, nearly died in his first Corsair landing. The damn thing dropped like a rock at 70 knots, he recalled. 1 second you're flying, the next you're falling. No warning. Just boom, you're headed for the ground. The stall characteristics were so violent that pilots called it the Ensign Eliminator. In the first 6 months of operations, the U.S. lost more Corsairs to accidents than to all enemy action combined. Japanese intelligence meticulously tracked these losses. Lieutenant Commander Takeo Tanemizu, stationed at Rabaul, studied every crashed Corsair report. The Americans were defeating themselves, he noted. Their new fighter was so difficult to fly that our work was being done for us. We joked that we should send medals to the Vogt Company for building such a pilot killer. But then something strange began happening in the after-action reports. Zeros were disappearing. Not in the turning dogfights where Japanese pilots excelled, but in high-speed diving attacks where they never even saw their attackers. Pilots who survived reported a new sound, a distinctive whistle caused by oil coolers in the Corsair's wing roots. By the time they heard it, it was usually too late. Lieutenant Ken Walsh of VMF 124 discovered the Corsair's true nature by accident. On May 13, 1943, Caught alone by 3 Zeros over the Russell Islands, he did what Corsair training explicitly warned against. He tried to dogfight. The Zeros quickly gained advantage. In desperation, Walsh firewalled the throttle and dove. The Corsair accelerated like nothing he had ever flown. The airspeed indicator passed 400 knots, 420, 440. The controls remained responsive. The airframe stayed solid. Walsh pulled out of the dive and looked back. The Zeros were gone, not shot down but left far behind, their lighter construction preventing them from following the Corsair's violent dive. He climbed back to altitude using the massive speed advantage, then dove again on the unsuspecting Zeros. 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, each firing 800 rounds per minute, converged at 300 yards. The first Zero exploded. The second burst into flames. The third tried to dive away, but the Corsair followed it down effortlessly. The mathematics of air combat were being rewritten. It wasn't about turning. It wasn't about dancing in the sky. It was about speed, altitude, and firepower. The Corsair could climb to 25,000 feet faster than a Zero could reach 20,000. It could dive at speeds that would tear a Zero apart. And those 6 .50 caliber guns delivered more weight of fire in 3 seconds than a Zero could deliver in 10. Commander Genda received the first disturbing reports in July 1943. Entire flights of Zeros were being ambushed from above by Corsairs they never saw coming. The American pilots had developed new tactics. No more turning battles, no more dogfights. They climbed high, dove fast, fired, and climbed away using their superior power. If they missed, they didn't turn back. They just climbed and set up another run. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nishizawa, Japan's greatest ace with over 100 victories, encountered Corsairs for the first time on August 7, 1943. "They came from the sun," he reported. "By the time we saw them, they were already firing. Suzuki's plane exploded. Ota went down in flames. I turned hard left, but the American didn't follow. He just climbed away. I couldn't catch him. My Zero felt like it was standing still." The kill ratios began shifting dramatically. In early 1943, Zeros enjoyed a 3-to-1 advantage over American fighters. By September, Corsairs were achieving 7-to-1 ratios against Zeros. The mathematics weren't just changing, they were reversing. Marine Captain Robert Hansen shot down 20 Zeros in 6 weeks, flying a Corsair. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh scored 21 victories in 3 months. These weren't lucky shots. They were systematic executions. The 6 .50 caliber machine guns were part of the equation. Each round was half an inch in diameter, traveling at 2,800 feet per second. A 1-second burst put 80 rounds on target. The Zero's light construction, which gave it such maneuverability, offered no protection. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through aluminum like paper. A single hit in the fuel tank meant explosion. The self-sealing fuel tanks that saved American pilots' lives were too heavy for the weight-conscious Zero design. Chief Petty Officer Toshio Ota, ground crew chief at Rabaul, watched the steady stream of damaged Zeros returning from combat. The bullet holes were different, he remembered. American .40 caliber rounds made small holes. These .50 caliber rounds tore chunks out of aircraft. Wings with holes you could put your head through. Fuselages that looked like they had been attacked with sledgehammers. And so many didn't come back at all. The Corsair's speed advantage became a psychological weapon. Zero pilots who had always dictated the terms of combat now found themselves constantly on the defensive. They couldn't force the Americans to fight on their terms. The Corsairs would appear, slash through formations, and vanish into altitude the Zeros couldn't reach. By the time Japanese pilots climbed to engagement altitude, the Corsairs were already setting up another diving attack. Major Donald Yost of VMF 213 described the new reality. We stopped thinking like fighter pilots and started thinking like hunters. Altitude was ammunition. Speed was life. You dove, you shot, you climbed. If a Zero got on your tail, you didn't turn. You just pushed the stick forward and left him behind. At 400 knots, nothing could follow a Corsair. The mathematics of pilot training compounded Japan's growing crisis. It took 2 years to train a competent Zero pilot. The complex art of dogfighting required hundreds of hours to master. But the Corsairs' slash-and-run tactics could be learned in months. American pilots were arriving in theater with 200 hours of flight time and succeeding against Japanese veterans with thousands. The plane's performance compensated for experience gaps. By November 1943, Japanese naval aviation faced a crisis. The cream of their pilot corps was being systematically destroyed by an aircraft they had dismissed as too dangerous to fly. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi wrote in his report to Tokyo, "The enemy has abandoned honorable combat. They attack from advantage and flee when challenged. Their new fighter is faster than our fastest, climbs higher than our highest, and hits harder than we can absorb. We are not losing to better pilots. We are losing to better machines." The disparity in production made the mathematics even more brutal. America produced 7,829 Corsairs by war's end. Japan managed to build 10,939 Zeros total, but spread across 4 years of combat on multiple fronts. By late 1943, Corsairs were arriving in theater faster than Zeros could be manufactured. Every lost Japanese pilot represented years of training. Every lost American pilot was replaced by 2 more within months. Commander Minoru Genda, who had once laughed at reports of American pilots killing themselves in training, now faced a different reality. In December 1943, after analyzing 6 months of combat reports, he wrote, "We mocked their aircraft as too difficult to fly. We failed to understand that difficulty meant capability. An aircraft that challenges its own pilots to master it will destroy pilots who never face such challenges. The Corsair is not a dogfighter, it is an executioner." The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was devastating. Lieutenant Takeo Tanamizu, one of the few aces to survive the war, described the change. "In 1942, we owned the sky. American pilots feared us. By 1944, we feared them, not their skill, their machines. You would hear that whistle and know death was diving on you. You could not outrun it. You could not outclimb it. You could only try to outturn it. And while you were turning, another Corsair was already lining up its dive." The U.S. Marine Corps' VMF 214, the famous Black Sheep Squadron, demonstrated the Corsairs' dominance in their combat tour from September 1943 to January 1944. In 4 months, they shot down 97 Japanese aircraft while losing only 12 Corsairs, and most of those to ground fire, not air combat. The mathematics were irrefutable. The dogfighting Zero was being hunted to extinction by an aircraft its pilots had mocked. First Lieutenant Robert Hansen achieved the ultimate demonstration of Corsair superiority on January 14, 1944. In a single mission lasting 1 hour and 45 minutes, he shot down 5 Zeros. Not in a confused melee, but in 5 separate diving attacks. Climb, spot, dive, fire, climb. The Zeros never touched him. He landed with 400 rounds remaining, his aircraft undamaged except for some paint chips from debris. The age of dogfighting was over. The Corsair's combat record by war's end spoke to the complete reversal of fortune. F4U pilots claimed over 2,000 enemy aircraft destroyed against 189 Corsairs lost in air combat, an 11-to-1 kill ratio. The aircraft Japanese pilots had laughed at, as too dangerous to fly, had become the most successful American fighter of the Pacific War. Marine Corps pilots alone accounted for over 1,000 victories flying the bent-wing bird. Captain Philip DeLong, who flew Corsairs with VMF 212, summarized the transformation. The Japanese trained for 20 years to fight the last war. Graceful, turning combat like aerial ballet. We showed up with a sledgehammer. They wanted to dance. We wanted to kill. The Corsair couldn't dance, but it sure could kill. Those 650s would saw a zero in half before the pilot knew we were there. The final mathematics were recorded by the Japanese Navy itself. By August 1945, of the thousands of naval aviators who had laughed at early Corsair reports, fewer than 100 remained alive. The rest had discovered too late that in modern war, speed and firepower trump tradition and technique. The whistle of oil coolers in a diving Corsair had become the sound of Japan's defeat in the air. The lessons learned over the Pacific echoed through aviation history. Air combat would never again be primarily about turning ability. Speed, altitude, and firepower became the trinity of fighter design. The Zero, perfect for its time, was trapped in an obsolete paradigm. The Corsair, difficult and dangerous, represented the future, where technology could overcome technique, where machine performance could dominate human skill, where the mathematics of war favored industry over ideology. Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's greatest surviving ace, reflected after the war, "We laughed when we heard American pilots were dying in training accidents. We thought it showed their inferiority. We didn't understand they were learning to master a machine we couldn't match. By the time we stopped laughing, most of us were already dead." The Corsair taught us that in modern war, the difficult path in training becomes the easy path in combat. They accepted losses in peacetime to prevent losses in wartime. We preserved our pilots in training and lost them in battle. The mathematics of aerial warfare had changed forever in the skies over the Pacific. The Corsair, born dangerous and difficult, had evolved into the most lethal fighter of its generation. The Zero, born perfect for its purpose, became obsolete the moment air combat evolved beyond turning circles in the sky. In the end, the aircraft Japanese pilots mocked for killing its own pilots in training killed far more of theirs in combat. The last laugh, delivered through 650 caliber guns at 400 knots, belonged to the ungainly bent-wing bird that couldn't even see the runway on takeoff.